Your little cushion.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Great. So, like I said before, we're going to discuss an overview of the issue. Then we're going to go through an analysis from legal, ethical, and financial standpoints. Then we're going to cover the solution and how that addresses each of those three components. And then we're going to wrap up with some final thoughts. So first, an overview of the problem. How did the private prison industry even come into existence? So it starts back in the 1980s when we think about government facilities and the war on crime, mass incarceration. There was a huge push and a significant increase in the prison population. So what happened was the government was no longer able to house those prisoners because there was a max capacity. So what they decided to do was create government contracts with private companies to begin housing those prisoners. The issue is, back in the 80s, it made a lot of sense to do that, but it doesn't make that much more sense in 2017 because the only revenue stream that GEO Group has coming in is coming from how many prisoners are in a facility. So if you have more prisoners in an actual facility, you're making more money. If there are less prisoners in a facility, you make less money. So what we're going to discuss is how focusing on rehabilitation and reducing recidivism as a new revenue stream is actually going to improve market share for the entire company and lead to maximum value for all stakeholders involved. So another issue with this is also that we're insulating your company from volatility in the market based on the political and social environments. So a little bit about GEO Group. As you all may already know, there are 142 facilities with 99,000 beds worldwide. 60,000 of those beds are in the United States. And so GEO Group's facilities range anywhere from youth detention centers to probation offices to maximum security prisons, which are located in the green dots. And the high concentration of maximum security prisons are located in Texas, which is going to be the focus of our intervention. So what we want to prove is by focusing on the worst offenders in the high security prisons, we're going to actually improve value for the entire industry and actually be able to capture market share from one of GEO Group's biggest competitors, CoreCivic, who's currently a leader in the industry. So a little bit about GEO Group's values. Currently, GEO Group discusses their values as respecting human dignity and rights, focusing on rehabilitation programs, ensuring safe and secure environments, and having quality facilities. But the real question is GEO Group actually abiding by these policies? And if we look at the research, the answer is actually a resounding no. So looking at the problem a little bit more in depth, right now GEO Group, looking at the legal issues, for example, there's a lack of industry standards. So without a robust structure for how GEO Group should be operating in the industry, it leads to a lot of legal liability and lawsuit expenditures that leads to a lot of financial waste. And so by redirecting that money with our actual solution, we'll be able to see a lot more profitable ventures that GEO can actually spend its money on. From a financial standpoint, there's an unsustainable business model. By insulating GEO Group from the volatility of the political and social environment, we'll actually be able to discuss, which Craig's going to go into a little bit later. And then the ethical incentive. There's a unilateral incentive to imprison people based on the current model that GEO Group operates in. Therefore, by looking at rehabilitation and reducing recidivism, we'll be able to see an overall improvement in the system. And so that's where our solution comes in, which is the care, create, connect model. And so going a little bit more in depth, on the care side, we're going to redefine how we care for people in the prison system. So these are sons, daughters, fathers, mothers, actual people. And what we want to do is make sure that we're not just seeing them as prisoners, but as people and adjusting how we spend our money accordingly. On the create side, we want to create value for all of our stakeholders involved. So currently, as a for-profit company, we want to make sure we're maximizing the return for shareholders. We also want to make sure that we're improving value for the actual leadership, the employees, and the prisoners and their families themselves. And lastly, the connect side, facilitating re-entry into society. So that means we want to equip and empower all of our prisoners who are in the actual system with marketable skills that are going to help them long-term once far after they leave prison and prevent them from coming into the prison system again. So with that said, I'm going to pass it off to Samantha, our legal analyst, who's going to discuss the legal issues.
Thank you, Jordan. So our legal analysis today is first going to go into a broad overview of criminal justice principles. I'm sorry, we can appear to have some technical difficulties.
Maybe we need to aid a different filtering.
With the judge's permission, can I try to manually forward it?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's frozen. The whole computer is frozen.
Our legal analysis is first going to cover the incarceration cycle and recidivism and desistance, two broader criminal justice principles, and then I'm going to analyze the prison regulations on labor exploitation and why this is creating a legal problem for you as GEO Group. The incarceration cycle works by removing deviants, those who commit crime, from their neighborhoods and communities, placing them in detention facilities, returning to to their communities and bringing them back into our criminal justice system. This further perpetuates our cycle of crime and incidents of crime rates in our country, and perpetuates our incidences of crime and leads to more people in our prison system. When a prisoner exits our detention facilities, they will have two decisions they will face for the rest of their life: recidivate or desist. Recidivism is the belief that a prisoner is going to go back into our communities and commit crime again and end up back in our cycle. This creates a revolving door in our prison system as well as our criminal justice system. Desistance is going to be when an offender no longer commits any criminal activity and becomes a part of our community in a productive manner. Currently, the United States has one of the highest recidivism rates in the world and has the highest incarceration rate out of any country. Currently, this is because ineffective rehabilitation efforts are not cost effective and is a huge financial waste for you, Jeeper. Seth Wessler is the first investigative reporter who really exposed the lack of industry standards in the prison industry. His work found that our prisons, your company, when you contract with the government, you would determine what your regulations are going to be as opposed to the public prisons who are highly regulated by our government. This creates huge issues in terms of medical care, the quality of your staff, as well as the life quality and rehabilitation efforts that are occurring in your prisons. The Department of Justice recently conducted an analysis of the private prison industry last year and verified Wessler's work. So, furthermore, the private prison industry prevents itself from being regulated through lobbying efforts. The Private Prison Information Act is the only act that has ever been presented to Congress that would require private prisons to be regulated in the same manner as federal prisons. This act has been struck down every year since 2005 because of the efforts of your rival, CoreCivic, who has spent over $7 million since 2005 to prevent this act from coming into place. Furthermore, lobbying for three-strike laws, mandatory minimums, and harsh sentencing does increase the number of prisoners that would be in GeoGroup's facilities and would allow you to maximize profits in that sense. However, it is unsustainable in the current business cycle, which Craig will further discuss in a few moments. As you may know, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in the United States. However, this clause right here, except as a punishment for crime where the party shall have been duly convicted, prevents criminals in our justice system from being subject to the same employment laws as regular employees. Through lawsuits posed against companies, including yourself, the court system has ruled that because the relationship between prisoners and yourself is not economic in nature, it is penological in nature, they are stripped of their rights as employees for companies who are putting them to work and barring them from having access to our employment laws in this country. Our main takeaways from the justice system today are going to show that as a business, you are currently unable to operate ethically and maximize your profitability because the lack of regulations results in no industry standards, which is creating a lot of loopholes for you to act unethically and get away with it. Labor laws are dehumanizing and interfere with rehabilitation efforts, which is creating a huge financial waste for you as a company, and this perpetuates our incarceration cycle, and recidivism rates are high, which decreases actually your ability to maximize your profits, which Craig will go further into.
All right, thank you. So for 2016, as you guys know, your overall revenue was $1.4 billion, and your overall net income was $148 million. And so you guys are doing really well, and this is over years, it's continually increasing. But you guys have a problem. Government regulation can lead to an unsustainable business model that could eventually put you guys out of business, unfortunately. We believe implementing our programs that are going to reduce recidivism rates, reduce the overall prison population, will help save the American taxpayer approximately $25 billion and lead to a sustainable business model that the American public and the government are going to support. So to begin, we're going to do an analysis of your stock price. You'll see in the fall of 2016 a huge drop, an overall loss of $841 million. Now, that can be directly correlated to the Obama administration's decision to start closing private prisons. The reasons cited for closing these private prisons were poor safety, poor security, and no overall value compared to your public peers. Now, you can also see that it's returned in value based off the election of Donald Trump, but this should serve as a wake-up call that you need to do things differently. If the American public and a new administration comes on board that does not like private prisons and likes what you're doing, they're going to shut you down and you will no longer have a business. Continuing on, I just wanted to go over the overall value or how much it costs American taxpayers to house prisoners today. At a value of $31,000 per prisoner and 2.2 million people in prison, American taxpayers are spending $6.82 billion on prisons today. And this is the kind of money they would like to be spending somewhere else. As said earlier though, we imprison the most amount of people of any nation. So approximately 700 individuals per 100,000 are in prison today. Now this is well beyond any country and even above countries like Russia. Now what we think we can do is implementing our programs, we can get those numbers to around 150 individuals. Those are very similar to countries like the United Kingdom or Australia. On the other side too, we did an analysis of what the most amount of cost it would cost us to implement this program. We know that implementing our new programs are going to cost money. And the most expensive cost we found was Norway, who you can find it very near the bottom of our chart, and that was $93,000 per prisoner. Now, if we put these numbers together, we find that we can save $25 billion. The American taxpayer paying $25 billion less. That's something the American public and the government can get behind. Now, the one question that you will have is, if we're reducing the overall prison population, how are you going to make money? And the idea really is coming in that you're going to be expanding market share. Companies are going to look to you, the government's going to look to you to make overall the actual money. And I'll be going over your actual profit analysis in the actual solution slides. So I'd like to sum up in that I'd like to create a sustainable business model for you to be able to operate into the future. I'd like to save American taxpayers money, and in the end, I would like to reduce the overall prison population by implementing these recidivism programs to help create a sustainable business model for you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jenna Lee. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. So to begin with our ethical analysis, I first want to provide some context to the situation. So with the creation of private prisons, we saw a shift in responsibility from lawmakers and government officials onto Wall Street traders and corporate executives. So this also created a shift in the mindset of GEO Group as you as the board of directors. So we shifted into a business-oriented mindset. And this has actually led full circle from cost-cutting strategies and profit-driven models to actually profiting off the misfortune of others. So to begin our ethical analysis, we actually structure it into a three-pronged solution or a three-pronged analysis in order to understand our solution. So because we saw this high increase in human rights violations and decrease in the health and well-being of our prisoners, we realized we need this element of care. Next, we understood there's so many stakeholders involved, from you as the board of directors to the prisoners themselves. So we realized we need to create this connection in terms of creating the same type of value. And finally, we realized that with vocational development, there was actually a lack in the inefficiency of creating a self-sufficient prisoner once they have left the facility. So we need to connect them, connect the skills that they're going to actually create in our rehabilitation program, and connect them with actual skills that will help them succeed in society. To begin with the care analysis portion. So care is based in the intrinsic value of actually being human. So you are ethically owed just on the basis that you're a human being. So imagine, you are a prisoner in the GEO Group facility, and a guard comes up to you and says, when I see you, I see $80 a day. So this is a huge red flag. So this is a huge ethical concern too, based in the private system. So we've taken this trickle-down effect from board of directors and top executives and had this business mindset to view prisoners as not as a commodity rather than a human being. Next, we said there's actually a decrease in care for the health and well-being. So how can one healthcare professional be responsible for the care of over 2,000 prisoners? They simply cannot. This ratio is unsustainable and actually unfair in terms of the healthcare professional's life as well as the prisoners. So a simple diagnosis could turn into a serious misdiagnosis, which could lead to potential unplanned death. We finally see that there's a significant security and oversight in terms of our correctional officers. So they have actually a low wage. They do not have the opportunity to advance in career development, and they overall have led to a low job satisfaction and has increased employee turnover rate. So we need to increase this communication between the board of directors, between the top executives, and it needs to trickle down to realize that we're not only focused on profit as GEO Group. We want to create a sense of value that is going to help and increase the treatment of prisoners instead of this vicious cycle of the unhappiness of our correctional officers that are leading to taking it out on the prisoners and overall decreased respect for the GEO Group facilities. So moving on to create, Rachel is going to explain how this value creation is going to be susceptible and more inclusive for us as stakeholders.
Thank you, Jenna Lee. Now, as Jenna Lee mentioned, when we say create, we refer to the creation of value. And these are the parties that we have identified as main stakeholders in GEO Group system. It ranges from everyone such as companies who employ prisoners to healthcare and food service providers, just parties who have a stake in the day-to-day operations of GEO Group facilities. Then there are those shareholders who seek a return on investment, and that's their definition of value. And lastly, there's the public who experiences the direct social impact of recidivism. Now, we've also noticed a tension in how all of these stakeholders are struggling to reconcile their individual interests with a shared motivation to maximize value. However, it seems that the way that they're currently involved in GEO Group's unethical operations is actually detracting from their value and the way that they have potential to maximize it. Therefore, we ought to shift their definition of value from the value that they can extract from prisoners in maximizing the number of prisoners to the value that they can instill in prisoners. And now the installation of value comes directly from our Connect pillar. Did you know that companies such as Victoria's Secret, Starbucks, and McDonald's all employ prison labor in their supply chain? But did you also know that these companies pay prisoners wages as low as 20 to 40 cents an hour? And also, furthermore, these companies are employing prisoners to do such unethical tasks as sewing in false tags on garments to falsify their country of origin. In this way, prisoners are used as a puppet to carry out the devious profiteering methods of companies. And with wages as low as 20 to 40 cents an hour, how can they possibly support their families or their dependents while they're in prison, and furthermore, once they're released from prison? Or how can they even support themselves? And by performing these menial tasks, such as sewing tags on garments for 10 hours a day, or just dialing numbers at call centers for 10 hours a day, how do they possibly develop any marketable skill base to advance or challenge themselves from a technical or cognitive perspective once they're released? This lack of self-sufficiency, coupled with a lack of purpose, drives the behavior of repeat offenders. So our key takeaways from our ethical analysis. We need to shift our definition of value and therefore incentivize stakeholders to act ethically and maximize their value in the private prison system. We need to shift our definition of care from caring about how filled our facilities are to caring about how we actually treat our prisoners. And we recognize the limitations of current rehabilitation programs with their wage and their skill installation. And the combination of these three ethical issues do not reflect the values that GEO Group espouses. And this is something that our solution strives to change.
Thanks, Rachel. So now we're going to talk about the solution and the implementation timeline for how we're going to go about getting this system into GEO Group's facilities. So again, revisiting this Care, Create, Connect model. We've talked about it a lot, but what I really want to harp in on is make sure that we're actually focusing on prisoners as human beings. They're not commodities. They're people who require care, require expenditures, but we also want to make that connection to the fact that by doing this, we'll increase the long-term value and expand GEO Group's market share to be a leader in the industry. So, starting from the care side, what do we want to do? Part of it starts with providing that timely and adequate care. As Jenna Lee had mentioned, we talked about the 1 providers every 2,000 prisoner ratio, which leads to a huge issue. How does the provider manage to provide adequate care to all of those prisoners? It's kind of hard to do that. So what we suggest is introducing a clinical rotations in correctional medicine for 3rd and 4th year medical students. So medical students can do basic vital signs, a lot of that primary intervention to prevent that tertiary and upstream care that's needed for diseases that are unaddressed for a long time. Another part of our solution includes telemedicine and preventative care. So that a small investment in the technology of telemedicine allows consults with specialists anywhere as far as 200, 300 miles away, and they're able to actually get the care that they need to prevent a lot of the issues that come up from not having regular checkups. And the last part is positive programming. This deals with spending money on training prisoners how to live a healthy lifestyle with diet and exercise while they're in prison to make sure it carries over into once they're outside of prison. So you think about somebody who is more likely to steal because they don't have access to healthy food. So understanding those kinds of things things will help them in the long term. On the create side, this deals with the stakeholders who are actually in the prison. So we think about the employees, we think about the leadership. So a lot of this we want to deal with is improving the pay and the quality of the correctional officers who are in the facility. So we want to make sure that we're going to guarantee equality and safe facilities. We need to make sure we're empowering and equipping the correctional officers to do so. Another part of that also includes incentivizing them to actually get certification programs. So the higher the quality of the prisoner, the correctional officers, the better the treatment of the prisoners in the facility. And the last part of this is tying executive compensation rates to reduction in recidivism. So if we start treating and solving the issue by rewarding our leadership with the actual solution to the problem, we'll begin to see a new culture in the overall system, and we'll see reduction in recidivism rates as a result. And again, on the connect side, this mainly deals with just connecting the skills that prisoners need once they get out of prison from menial tasks to higher cognitive thinking skills that actually help them to get better jobs once they get out of prison, and it actually help them stay out. When we think about the generational impact of this as well, is that not only is this going to affect them, it's also going to affect their families. If they have better paying jobs, their children are less likely to enter prison, as the data shows, as well as they're also less likely to enter prison as well. So with that, I'm going to move to the impact slide and show the overall impact of our intervention.
Thank you, Drew. So my team has done an analysis of some different programs that we'd like to implement. And here are some of the key takeaways. We would like to reduce that recidivism rate, and we're going to do that by, one of the ways we're going to do that is by associating it with executive bonuses. As recidivism goes down, executive bonuses go up. We'd also like to close the wage gap. We'd like to reduce executive bonuses or executive pay by a little bit, not by much, and increase the overall pay of the correction officers. And this will increase the quality and safety inside our prisons. And then actually, this is counterintuitive, but improving the amount of providers in a prison, the amount of health individuals that are helping people become healthy again, we're actually going to save money because those small problems aren't going to be big problems that the prisoners are going to have to pay. We're able to calculate a $6.75 million savings that we can do if we implement that program. Now, the overall financial impact in our program that we'd like to implement is a small pilot program. Have 200 individuals prisoners in this program with initial expenditure of $27 million over 5 years, and we were able to break even at 10 years. And at fiscal year 15, we were able to generate $107 million, and at fiscal year 20, we were able to generate $215 million. So not only is this ethically correct, it's financially feasible and can benefit you. Now, I would like to focus on the 5% growth rate that's up there. That is the key element to this. So after 5 years, we believe that we're going to be able to show the American public and the government that our system is viable and it's good to invest in. And therefore, having the government invest in it, and then once you have said that your prison system is a good prison system and people want to come to your prison system and invest in your prison system, you can be able to expand. And we've decided on a 5% growth rate as a reasonable rate for you to expand and generate these numbers. I'll turn it back over to Dora to finish up the solution.
Thanks, Greg. So again, as a timeline, what we want to do is implement this in one prison, in a single facility, and show that we're actually adding value in one area and expand that to other areas. What we'll see is in the long term, and doing an analysis after every single year and showing that we are bringing value on the care, create, and connect components, we're going to expand this to other prisons and capture market share, even from competitors such as Core Civic. And so to wrap it up with some final thoughts, the overall solution comes back to how are we adding value? From the ethical standpoint, there's a unilateral incentive to imprison people because that's the only revenue stream that exists. So the question is, how can we say that we're going to abide by the values that we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation if there are incentives to do otherwise? From the legal standpoint, if there are no industry standards and there's tons of waste that's happening, how can you expect to actually be able to spend money in productive ways in the long term? And from the financial standpoint, if there's political and social volatility, how can you expect to insulate yourself from the changes in the market? So by implementing our program, we'll see a huge significant increase in value and overall improvement in the prisoners' lives once they're in prison to once they leave prison and prevent them from coming back in. So with that, we thank you so much for your time, and now I'll open it up for any questions.
Okay. You made it with 8 seconds to spare. I was going to give you a little cushion anyway. Okay, hang on 1 second. Okay, judges, would you all like to start the questions?
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. I know that Germany is very successful with their program, and I was wondering, because I couldn't see on the slide exactly where they fell in terms of the cost. You listed the countries. I
Right.
counted. Where are they in costs in terms of?
Absolutely. The per prisoner cost is a difficult number to come up with. Some countries report it and some don't. Norway was the one that was most popular, and it also had a very good number in terms of low recidivism rates and overall prison population, so we focused on that. We didn't go through every single country and figure it out, but that would be a good example of a country that we'd like to look up and figure out those numbers.
Okay, so going, and just piggybacking on that in your comments, so Norway was the country that you focused on?
It was.
All
Well,
right.
just in terms of cost, how much they actually spend in their prison systems.
And where are they? I'm so sorry because it's,
Norway is right here.
Here from the bottom.
okay,
72 people per 100,000.
okay. I have others, but I'm going to.
Okay.
I have a question. As a member of this board, my duty is to my shareholders,
Right.
right? But what I seem to hear you say is that you're changing my obligation here to say it's in my interest to serve the public need and the needs of the inmates. Aren't you putting me in a position where I'm no longer focused on the needs of my shareholders? I'm really focused on the needs of society and inmates. Is that a problem?
Not necessarily, because the biggest issue is that there's a single stream of revenue right now. The only way that GeoGroup makes money is by actually having more prisoners in their facilities. So what we're suggesting is expanding what we're doing, expanding who we're serving to generate more money. So if we can show that we're adding value to prisoners, we're going to charge more money on those government contract renewals and bringing a larger market share. So it's basically what it's doing is changing the structure, making sure that we're maximizing value to shareholders in a way that we can't do with this unsustainable business model, since, as we saw with the stock price, it changes based on who's in office at any given time.
So what you're really proposing is to create more programs and opportunities for prisoners, and therefore we can go back to the government and say, because we're doing this benefit to prisoners, we're entitled to a greater fee for our services.
Correct.
And also to piggyback off of what Jordan said, we have it in our appendix, but a lot of our shareholders are actually divesting in GeoGroup, such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Wells Fargo, major universities, cities, and just public interest bodies, because they're not ethically aligned with what GeoGroup is actually doing. So we believe that by implementing this new program with all of these new ethical practices, they're going to back up and support GeoGroup, and therefore with that expanded market share, and we'll see increased investment rather than divestment.
Okay. So I have a question. Are you telling me by this financial impact that you're suggesting we go break even versus 148 million in net income?
We break even in year 10. I have the financial analysis in the appendix, but real quickly, just staying on this slide, the idea is that we're going to do a pilot program of 200 individuals. Now, those 200 individuals are going to
So
cost...
overall corporate, we're not going to break even. You're saying this particular pilot program
Yes.
is at break even.
Correct.
Okay, so let me go to another question. Where I see the improvements are executive bonuses. Are those tied to the number of non-repeat
Yes.
offenders? What are those numbers tied to? What's the incentive plan for those executive bonuses?
The actual recidivism rate. So as the recidivism rates are coming out, we're linking them to the take-home bonus that the executives have. So as the recidivism rate goes down, the executives can actually take home more of the bonus base. Since 50 to 60% of their salary is in bonuses, it's a huge incentive for them to actually focus on reducing those recidivism.
The other side to that too is if we can get the leadership to buy into reducing the recidivism rate, that's going to go throughout the entire country, and all levels of leadership are going to be supporting, hey, let's reduce this recidivism rate. We could also, as the CEO would be able to, I'm sure he would also incentivize reducing recidivism rate and supporting his employees to support this program. So that we found was a huge portion that changed the culture and implement it into the actual program.
As a follow-up question to that, though, what incentive do I have as a board member
to encourage recidivism. I mean, aren't I really just kind of reducing my future markets?
No, we struggled with that too, but what we found was, and this goes back to the government regulations and being highly susceptible, if you continue the way you operate right now, at some point, someone is going to say that they don't want you to run your prisons like that. Just like the Obama administration said, we're going to have more data proving that the private prison system isn't working as well as it should be, and they'll just close you down. And so if we're looking to have a sustainable business model where you can continue to do business well into the future and know that you're doing it ethically, you're going to be able to continue to go business and not just shut down just as some new administration coming on board.
Right, like the increased public perception is lowering this volatility and providing a stable revenue stream that more investors are going to get behind as well.
Absolutely.
What analysis do we have that higher paid guards, executive bonuses, and better doctors equals, less return prisoners? What happens to ethical training? Like you had that example of the guard that said, I see a prisoner, I see $80 a day. That's I would not consider that ethical thinking.
Right.
So what does your program do in the way of, we have ethical training within our corporation to all our employees, what's ethical in our business. Banks have what's ethical in that business. So what do you have to train a different way of thinking other than providing more doctors and more dollars?
Oh, so we have this in our appendix. There was a report issued by one of the bureaus Management and Training Corporation. And what they did, they kind of did an analysis of correctional officers in current private prison systems and how there's a lack of job satisfaction, and that's exactly what's trickling down into their behavior, and how there are options and existing certification programs that they can partake in to increase, I guess, just their performance on the job and their additional credentials. But a lot of them, I think it's less than 20% of current correctional officers actually partake in them. So incentivizing these correctional officers to partake in these training programs, they're going to be developing more skills, and they're going to improve their oversight and the quality of the oversight and care that they're providing in these prisons. And for that, they'll be rewarded and incentivized with a bonus or an increase in pay.
So right now it's voluntary, not mandatory.
Correct.
I have a question too on your training programs for the actual prisoners, to the rehabilitation to try to make them productive. You've got to change their mindset so that, I'm not going to generalize over all the prisoners, but basically most of them have grown up in a different culture, which has led them, unfortunately. So what kind of proposals, who would be developing these programs? What do you suggest to us as far as improving the programs to rehabilitate them?
So we would probably incorporate work with lead criminologists who have already developed certain programs that have been established and have been effective in training these. A lot of the times prisoners have the opportunity to get GEDs while they're in prison, and that's been proven to help reduce their recidivism rates, because that means that they have the opportunity to go pursue education upon release. A lot of the times there are opportunities for them to go out into the business world and become entrepreneurs and be successful because they are able to learn these skills while in prison, and those have been linked to lower recidivism rates, and that has been piloted in several public prisons but has not been tried in private prisons yet.
And we have to recognize that not all prisoners can be rehabilitated.
Yes, that would also require certain qualifications for the prisoners to be eligible. Of course, if you have a life sentence, you would be ineligible for a program like this in terms of the rehabilitation efforts, but it would not prevent them from having the access to better health care.
I think in reference back to the Norway prison system, and that was one of those extremely expensive. And something that they do there is that they don't have life sentences. The maximum sentence there is 20 years. So there was an individual who committed a heinous crime, murdered a couple of individuals, and he most likely won't get out of prison. They just will continue to extend his prison system. But again, it's that mindset that we want to look at these individuals going to prison and taking away their freedom. That's the punishment. The punishment shouldn't necessarily just being in prison and making their lives miserable. And that's something that we want to develop throughout this entire program.
But that's the whole point of prison, isn't it? I mean, we're not there to be nice. We're trying to create a disincentive for people not to commit crimes, and the result of committing crimes is going to prison. So why should we create a hotel environment for them?
So-
We're in the business of punishment, aren't we?
I'll address that question. So there's this theory in criminology called the deterrence theory, and Daniel Nagin is a renowned statistician and criminologist who published a paper in 2013 that analyzed all available data. Deterrence theory states that we currently believe that having harsh sentencing and long prison stays is going to reduce recidivism. However, his data said otherwise. It said that basically saying that if you are going to be definitively caught and slapped with a fine or a short prison sentence, you are less likely going to go back into the world and participate in crime. However, if you have these long prison sentences, you're realizing that it's not deterring criminals from activity. Within 36 months, they are most likely to end up back in our criminal justice system. And as repeat offenders, they end up with longer sentences and harsher sentences, and that's perpetuating that cycle of crime.
I'd like to emphasize that taking away someone's freedom, not letting them do what they want to do, that is a punishment. That is, if you don't have the freedom to go where you want, that in and of itself is the punishment. The actual being in the prison and having bad treatment, that shouldn't be the punishment.
And I think
That is your opinion.
It's unfortunately supported by multiple studies, and it's supported by, I referenced the Norway system. As the American public, we have to redirect how we think about prisoners. We're doing something wrong. We have the most imprisoned population in the entire world. And the countries that I noted that were way above there, it's almost embarrassing to say that we're associated with them, with this kind of. So it does have to, the American public will have to change their mindset with how this works. But it is important to be able to implement these programs, and Geo Group can lead that.
And a lot of it, I'm sorry.
I just want to comment. I agree. I know that, we need to look at this differently.
Right.
But I also think we also need to keep in mind that there are certain folks that maybe do not deserve this opportunity if you visit the crime that they committed. So
that would lead to developing qualifications and eligibility for the programs, and that would require consulting with criminologists as well as lawyers and other legal professionals to develop this, and that's something that we would bring on in addition to ourselves on the team.
And the other part, I agree that this punishment inside prisons, not everyone will agree with it, but what people will agree with is if there's someone in prison and he gets out, the entire American public doesn't want him doing a bad crime and going back to prison. So if we can focus on that and reduce the overall recidivism rate and prevent them from doing bad things again, that's a net benefit to society.
And another thing I'd like to add to what you said, so you said that something really interesting is that a lot of the people who are coming to the system were raised in a different culture and a different mindset. And so I think that we're not necessarily saying that we want to provide a hotel experience for the worst offenders. What we're saying is for the people who do come in who don't know any better, have no other purview at all, we want to provide a way for them to be supported so that they're not, they don't have to go back to that lifestyle once they get out. And those are the people we want to focus on. I mean, with, some of our facilities have 3,000 beds. We're focusing on, 200 at a time. So we're focusing on ones that we think we get the most value out of in terms of rehabilitating them, and that's what we're focusing on, not the general public of all the offenders. We're focusing on people who think that actually would actually benefit from this program. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, and piggybacking off of what Jordan said and what Rachel had discussed is when they're learning to do unethical practices in their employment in prisons, such as changing the tags on garments. That's an unethical behavior that they're seeing, and they're being told it's okay to do this. They're going to go take that into the real world, and when they're released, and that's going to further improve, allow them to perpetuate the incarceration cycle because they're being taught it's okay to be unethical in your business practices and participate in crime, essentially, because that's fraud.
Well, we've moved them right into slavery in a different fashion.
Absolutely. And one of the things I wanted to address what you mentioned earlier with what the vocational programs would actually look like. as I mentioned in the presentation, right now there's this focus on menial and repetitive skills, and it doesn't acknowledge the prisoners as humans in that it kind of stifles their potential for growth and doesn't challenge them or connect them with their talents. And so that's what our vocational program strives to change, is giving them that sense of purpose, giving them opportunities to push themselves and connect with those talents and specializations. And so perhaps one measure that those programs could entail would be, rather than working in the supply chains at the very bottom of these huge corporations, is scaling it down and working with smaller, more local companies that might be in closer proximity to those facilities, just because that way the prisoners feel more empowered and as if they are having a direct impact on those communities. And not only is that an economic benefit to the community, and also a benefit to the prisoner when they're leaving prison, but it also provides the prisoner with a sense of identity, which is crucial for those prisoners who do come from a different background and do feel kind of like an expat in the system.
Have you done a cost analysis of these vocational programs and cost per inmate? And aren't we in fact creating a greater risk for the company by bringing people into the system who are going to provide these vocational programs?
Sure.
And what are the risk factors that we need to consider as a board?
So here, sorry, I don't have my glasses on, but here are the vocations of value, and it kind of mentions about how prisoners are more incentivized to do more and bring more money back to the prison system based on the type of work that they're doing. So if they're committed to doing menial tasks such as garment work or working in call centers, they're less incentivized to do a good job and to advance in this. If we go up, in terms of cost, we have a cost analysis on here, right there.
So the overall cost analysis that we found for each individual prisoner is going up to, it's going to be about an extra $30,000 per prisoner. Now, that sticker shock is very big, but I have to go back to the point where we were trying to reduce the overall prison population. The government is going to pick, initially that outlay is going to be provided by the company over that 5 years for each of these 200 prisoners, but that is eventually going to be picked up by the government by saying, yes, we believe in those programs, let's continue to develop them, and then reduce the overall prison population.
And as Craig mentioned earlier, it was very difficult for us to run a financial analysis that would be thorough and accurate because there's actually this comprehensive report called the VERA report, and what it found, it compiles reporting on prison trends from every state in the nation, and the reporting between states is extremely inconsistent. Some states report costs just based on basic services to prisoners like food and health care, and then others account for supplies, account for oversight in the prisoners when calculating costs, so there were huge range disparities. So for example, the cost of a prisoner in West Virginia was like $20,000 higher than the cost of a prisoner in New York. But we don't know if that's true. We just know that it stems from a disparity in reporting methods.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Are we out of time?
No, not yet. We've got another almost 2 minutes.
Okay, so you talked about healthcare, and you focus mostly on physical healthcare. What about mental health care? Is that a component here in determining not only helping them reculturalize, and number two, determining if they're capable of reculturalizing?
Exactly. So as you can see, there's actually a project called Liberation Yoga, which that's what we're going to model off one of our rehabilitation programs. And this actually gives the opportunity for prisoners to get certified into the mental health, understanding meditation, and focusing on their physical and mental well-being. And then they get to teach that to other prisoners, which they have developed relationships while they've been in prison. And that has created the full circle to create this new community outside as well.
Oh, I think you're kind of missing the question because, you know, here in Los Angeles, we have the largest mental health facility in the country. It's called the county jail. And 50% of the people who come encounter police encounters have serious mental problems. So, not meditation,
So
but
it's-
mental
it's-
health issues.
Jordan.
How are you going to address those?
No, absolutely. So the largest increase in our overall budget is coming directly from that, these mental health issues. We absolutely identify that those are the individuals, and then a lot of these individuals that are going to jail do have these mental health problems. So that a large portion of that $30,000 budget is going directly to that. Now, I don't see that as a risk. I see that as an opportunity. It's again, just more individuals that need our help. And so that, again, expanding that market share of individuals that we can apply our programs to.
And for the telemedicine component, it can mean bringing psychiatrists and psychologists through those systems and connecting those providers with prisoners.
Well, I would suggest to you that maybe that's a revenue stream for us.
Absolutely.
That if you have a declining population and that's declining revenues, we replace it by providing all these mental health services and have them on staff and charge the government.
Those are the parts of our program. The expansion of this to even bigger and bigger in our overall company and focusing on rehabilitation and not just prisoners can absolutely lead to more revenue streams.
Right. And Duke University actually piloted a program with a nearby prison system called the Healthy Transitions Program, and that brought in certified mental health professionals to the prison facilities to work with them in building life skills, as Jordan mentioned earlier, like fitness and nutrition, but also their psychological well-being. And that was shown as successful. It just hasn't been expanded to operate on a larger scale.
Okay, we are out of the 20-minute
All right, thank you very much.
Well, don't go away.
Yeah, we recognize this is a very controversial issue. It was a lot of fun. It took us a long time to convince multiple people, but I really appreciate all your questions.
Well, before we have more questions from the judges, you're now out of your role. You can ask as a judge questions. You can provide comments. You can provide compliments. You can provide criticisms, whatever you think. I'd like to, since I didn't get a question, and that's, you guys were wonderful, but I kept trying to, I want, never happened. So I'm going to now, as the Uber judge, to take advantage of asking a question or at least making a comment. I'm not on the board anymore. I'm just, it seems to me what you all are talking about is a culture change within the prisons that Geo Group runs. It's a culture change, and that culture change is important because ultimately it's going to be more profitable. And you've tried to convince us of that. And I like the idea of the pilot program because it gives us a chance as a board, if I were still talking to as a board member, to understand, well, is this thing going to work? But when you're talking about a culture change, you mentioned some of the ways that you would go about changing the culture. And I wanted you to talk a little bit more in depth about that. I know you don't have that much time, but it seems to me one of the key elements is to change the culture such that prisoners are treated as human beings. That's you brought that up very clearly, the ethical aspect of it. And that also bounces over to the guards, how they treat the prisoners within that culture. And you said you would incentivize the guards to be more sensitive and perhaps even have training for guards to emphasize this sensitivity. And that's where I got a little bit lost as to how exactly those programs were going to work. Those ethical educational programs for guards. Were there going to be checks and balances as to whether if guards began to treat prisoners in a way that was outside your values as a company and your mission as a company, which was to reduce recidivism, then there would be disciplinary action. just incentivizing them by increasing their pay didn't seem to me that was going to really do the job. It really demands a whole culture change. And that's for the whole company, not just for the guards. The guards are just one piece of the culture. So I wanted a little bit more about that culture change. I didn't hear in your presentation any reference to culture. Right. And I kind of wanted to hear more about that. Otherwise, I thought your presentation was very interesting, informative, obviously well researched. So I'll turn it back over to the judges to get some comments from them.
I think you had excellent eye contact, excellent presentation. You didn't seem nervous. You spoke a little bit fast at the beginning. I thought, oh my, they must be trying to just like cram in a lot of stuff in 25 minutes. And I think you've done the research and had the information. I think a lot of it seems to be in your appendix. I had the same issue as like, just don't throw money at people. You have to throw, the training. And as I asked the questions, you have that information. Again, I think it's in your appendix, and I don't know if you do a flash, of everything that's in your appendix, but I would bring in some bit of implementation of training, because I think your research was deeper than we realized just from your presentation. So I think you have the information. I think maybe weave a little bit more of it, but I thought it was a great job. It's a topic of great interest to me. I picked this not by university, but by topic. So thank you for taking the topic up.
I think there were just so many details that we didn't want to overwhelm you with the numbers and the research and things like that. So, that's what the appendix is for. So we'd be happy to share.
And I usually love the statistics because I'm a banker, but
we tried to balance, the one to financials or not.
Exactly.
Thank you.
So I'm going to give you a little bit of my background, so then my comments, where I'm coming from. Right out of law school, I externed for a federal court magistrate and worked with him on writs of habeas corpus that were, exhausted the state system, and then we were looking at appeals, murder convictions, and most of them I was working with. I was opening juvenile records. These were murders committed by children, and so I know that background of and how they lived on the streets, and their aunts and their uncles, and all, everybody had been in prison. So that's one culture. Then he mentioned, is it Mike? Mike mentioned, you're looking at the term I use, which is not a real word, reculturalizing, at many levels here, focusing on that. So it's not only reculturalizing the prisoners, but the prison guards, the folks that are working in the system. I'm a firm, the other side of the coin is that I went to law school because of domestic violence and sex abuse crimes. I'm incoming governor for Rotary International. I don't know if you know that service organization. My big passion is child sex trafficking. So I am not real pleased to let a child, as somebody who puts a child into sex trafficking, to get out easily. I'm lobbying for stronger laws. So that's, where I'm coming from a little bit. But overall, I thought your presentation was excellent. You're well prepared, very well prepared, understand your topic and your subject. I think you responded to questions well. You do speak a little. Slow yourself down if you're in another situation like this. Just slow down a little. It was a little hard to follow you in the beginning, especially. I don't know. I was thinking the same thing. You're trying to get it all into your time and understand. So you might have to think about how much you're saying so that you can say a little bit more slowly. A couple of you did that from time to time too. It was all very fast. But also, my last comment is suggestion on your PowerPoint, which you guys are all far younger than I am, and do this better than I probably could. But PowerPoints sometimes are more impactful if you have less on the screen. So pick out a few slides that have some really impactful statistic, as she mentioned, that would go, whoa, would just say, oh my gosh. And if it's trying to compare what's been done in Norway or Germany, look at their rates so that it's right there in front of you and we're not trying to look down at, lists. So take a couple of them, show a slide that really shows a statistic that really shows that this is going to work.
We're running out of it. There's another group coming in at 11. Dennis, did you have a couple comments?
No, I think they pretty much covered it. Basically had the same thoughts about the presentation. You could use less information on the screen. You were all very, very knowledgeable. Your depth of knowledge, your answers to follow-up questions were all very effective. The pace of your presentation I thought was good. I agree that Jeremy could have started out a little slower and
I think I got a little frazzled once our thing wasn't working. Clearly, once you guys really started rolling, it was clear. I was trying to just pick you guys apart, in terms of, trying to test you, and you were all very responsive and, compelling. So, and I agree with Mike about, the culture change issue that it's really what you're talking about here. You're taking a company that basically is in a dirty business, trying to get them to do something differently. So think about how you do that in a way that really does capture either it's both an ethical presentation about what you're doing is going to benefit society, and then the business arguments. I think you really
And you did great. It's just a constructive comment to be thinking about.
Yeah, and I think one of the constructive comments came from you, and that was you got a little frazzled when the slides weren't working. But when you're in business, when you're going to have these kind of moments. Believe me, this isn't the first time this is going to happen to you, or the last time, I should say. You're going to have those frazzling type of moments. All right, all of a sudden, this beautiful slide presentation, which you've worked on for months, and you're presenting to an executive committee, including your supervisor, goes on the fritz. Well, it's important how you react to that, okay? And it's important to think about, what if that happened? What would I do? Would I have some your slides to pass out in hard copy? So you could say, I don't know what's going on with the slides, we'll try to get this fixed out, but let's continue, I know your time is short, and pass out, if you didn't already, the PowerPoints. So it's important to know, it's important to keep your cool when those crises hit in presentation, and they will. And so this is a learning experience. This whole thing is supposed to be a learning experience, and this was the important thing. You'll think about that later. How could I have handled that differently when the slides weren't working the way they should? So
in real estate, they call it, if you can't fix it, feature it.
Listen, I want to thank our judges, and I want to give a big hand to our team. Thank you, guys. Well done.
I appreciate it.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
very well done. Very well done.
And thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you very
Oh,
much.
sure.
Yeah, that's nice. Coming up and shaking your hands. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you.
I'm their faculty
We'll
member.
see
I
you
want to
around.
also for your time here. My undergrad team is going on in 4 minutes, and I'm going to skedaddle really
So,
quick.
I need to get in a different